August the 10th, the year 2012. I'm with the Battleship New Jersey and the Kane University Oral History Project. Today I'm interviewing Mr. Ron Briggs of Woodbridge, Virginia, who served aboard the Battleship New Jersey from April 1982 until December 1985 during the Beirut crisis. He served in 1st Division in public affairs, working in the radio and TV station aboard the ship. Ron, thank you so much for the interview today.
Thank you.
Let's start off. First question: how did you get involved with Battleship New Jersey?
I was selected out of boot camp to serve on the New Jersey, and kind of an interesting story. I wasn't quite clear on what the New Jersey was when I was initially got my orders, and I thought initially I was going to a destroyer called the New Jersey because they said BB, I heard DD, and I thought I was going to a destroyer, and as it turned out, as luck would have it, I ended up at the New Jersey.
Let me ask a question. What made you join the Navy in the first place during the 1980s? That was a time when the military wasn't, quote, popular. What made you join the Navy?
I felt, and I've answered this question a lot, especially for my parents, I felt as though at that time I wanted to give something back to the country, and I felt that this was probably the best way to see some parts of the world that I'd never seen before, and also as an opportunity to give back to the country.
Okay, good. So when you first get aboard the New Jersey, what impressions did you have as you approach the ship, come aboard the ship?
When I first got to the ship, we had not been commissioned yet, so it was still in the shipyard, and it still had a lot of hoses and a lot of electrical cords, things like that, still attached to it. Did not stay on the ship initially. We were in barges across the pier, and that was kind of an experience. The barges themselves were the sleeping arrangements it was open arrangement with 3 bunks per unit, and they put about, I don't know, 15, 18 of us in one area, and when you get guys like that together, things, and it's hot in California, people tend to get a little edgy at times. And I can remember one particular evening when there was some folks, there was a scuffle that had broken out in our berthing compartment. And I can remember vividly my friend sitting on top of his bunk on the very top with a shoe. And he was basically hitting people to get him away from his bed. But so my initial impressions of the New Jersey were kind of, I didn't really have a lot to do initially because there wasn't much to do on the deck. We had a lot of, as I said, a lot of hoses, a lot of lines, things like that. So I spent a lot of my time doing what they called fire watch, going with the welders wherever they went, carrying my fire extinguisher, and working with the welders, and in doing that, kind of developed a relationship with the people, the civilians that actually had a hand in putting the ship together as well.
What was the sense of morale at the time of the future crew of the ship? What was going through the minds of the young men who were going to serve on a Battleship New Jersey, which had been put away for years?
I think there was a real sense of pride. We were, at the time, when we were scheduled to be commissioned, we were once again going to be the world's only battleship. And I can remember the cooks and the folks that served meals and stuff. We all had T-shirts, and they had the New Jersey insignia on it, the Firepower for Freedom. And then on the back of the T-shirts, they all said, "World's only battleship." And that was, I think, that was a sense of pride for everybody.
So it was still like a neat thing to do.
Yes, definitely.
Why do you think you were selected to go aboard the Battleship New Jersey? Was it a special, almost honor to be aboard a battleship? Was it your name just came up? What do you think happened?
It definitely was an honor, and I think I realized that later on. But as far as how I was initially selected, that I'm not sure of. Possibly because I scored so well in tests and things like that. At the time, I think there was a very selective process to bring people on board, and so that's one of the things I actually take a little pride in, that I was selected.
Now, before you joined the Navy, had you just graduated high school? Had you been out working in school?
Actually, no. I'd been out in the workforce. I graduated from high school in 1979 and had taken a job as a radio and TV announcer at a small station in Glendive, Montana. And I always described the community there as, if it weren't for the community college that was there, the population of the community would have been about half. And so I had done that and came back from there and started doing some retail work, things like that. And I didn't really have any direction, so to speak. Went to community college for a little while, and that really didn't appeal to me. And I think it was at that point where I was looking for direction and that kind of thing. I thought, well, I'm young enough, why not the military?
Now, once you get aboard the ship, how do you ultimately get assigned to the Public Affairs Division? Explain that one. I've never run into anybody who's in public affairs except for World War II. There's a public affairs announcer during battles who'd be, narrating the battles.
Yeah.
But how'd you get involved in that?
I think a lot of it was from perseverance. I knew what the public affairs folks did. I had done that on the outside with radio and TV work. I always had an interest in doing that kind of thing. And I initially wanted to go to the journalism school out of boot camp. Unfortunately, my test scores weren't that high. And so I was able to come here, stay on the deck force, and then what they called strike for a rate of journalism or journalist. And so I ended up, I think when we came on board and we were just starting to get the spaces squared away and everything, I introduced myself to the chief journalist on the ship and told him that I had an interest. And he kind of said, well, that's all well and good. Come on up when you have some free time. I'm sure we can find something for you to do. And I eventually worked with him in putting the office together, because we were all still getting our spaces put together and things. Putting the office together, arranging things, that kind of thing. And then just as luck would have it, I guess, I had gone home during the Christmas leave program that had been developed once we were off the coast of Beirut. We'd been out for so long that they started a program, a lottery almost, where sailors on the ship were selected to go home for a certain period of time. Fortunately, as luck would have it, I was in the first group, so I was able to go home for Christmas to spend with my former fiance and my family. And that was a good thing, but the bad part was I missed Bob Hope when Bob Hope came out during his Christmas USO tour. But it was, I think it was a lot through perseverance.
And where was the public affairs or journalism office located on the ship at the time?
It was, I believe, on the 01 level, right outside on the port side, right outside the lifts for the boats.
Okay. And and was it a large office, small?
It was a pretty good sized office. We had at the time probably 3 journalists assigned to the office. We had a chief, a first class petty officer, and myself. We had a public affairs officer whose office was right across the walkway from ours, and then we also had 2 photographers who were assigned to us. The darkroom at the time during Beirut was located on the 01 level, right above, on the same level as the helicopter control area. And then we had, of course, the technicians for the television station and radio station that were also assigned to the
And
group.
aboard a ship like this, for the public record, for the history people looking at this in the future, what did your public affairs office do? What were your responsibilities?
Our initial responsibility was to, I think, handle a lot of the media inquiries that the Navy was receiving regarding the New Jersey. We did port calls, and during those port calls, we always opened the ship up for tours. And giving tours was another part of the job that we had. as far as the initial job of a journalist or a public affairs officer, we were basically the speechwriters, the communications folks that talked to the outside world, wrote the speeches for the captain to give, that kind of thing. And so a lot of exposure to public affairs, the media, and the public in general.
And the person in charge of the office, was that a senior enlisted person?
He was a chief petty officer.
Chief petty officer.
And then there was the lieutenant commander that was in charge, that was the public affairs officer.
I see. Let's talk a little bit about this Beirut situation.
Okay.
Talk to me about, I understand you're over in the Philippines. Is that correct, when you first found
Yeah.
out?
Yeah. Well, we found out we were probably about 3 days from pulling back into port in Long Beach after being out for what was supposed to be an initial, I guess, shakedown type cruise. We'd just been off the coast of Nicaragua, actually. We went actually from the Philippines to Nicaragua and then through Panama. And it was interesting. When we first got here, there was a ceasefire signed that day. And so everybody kind of thought, well, this is going to be a short trip. We're not going to be out here that long. And I think that was my first exposure to the world of diplomacy, where you have a ceasefire, and that only means that one side's out of ammunition. They need to get some more ammunition, and then they'll be back. And so everybody was just kind of, I guess, a little bit on edge. We didn't know what our job was going to be, other than to provide naval gunfire support for the Marines.
That's once you found that you're going over to Beirut.
Right.
And you had to go through the Panama Canal.
Right. Went through the Panama Canal.
How was that trip? What was that trip like?
That trip was very interesting. We spent one day in Balboa on one side of the canal and cutting stuff off the side of the ship so that it would actually fit through the canal. And then the second day we were in Cologne putting stuff back on that we'd just cut off. And yeah, going through the canal was an experience. I mean, the ship was so wide that you could actually reach out and touch the side of the Panama Canal.
Did they have to hose down the side of the
Yes.
ship to provide a little lubrication?
Yes, exactly,
Right. And
exactly.
some of the light posts were pulled down also.
Yes,
I
yeah,
understand
there was a lot of stuff that was cut off the side of the ship. Guys were on deck with fire hoses, kind of just hosing things down to provide lubrication a little bit and help nudge it through. And I think a lot of credit has to do with the port crew in Panama that actually drove the ship. None of the Navy folks did not drive the ship through the canal. A lot of it was driven by the Panamanian port facility folks and things like that. So.
Now, once you leave the Panama Canal, you
Yes.
move fairly quickly across the Atlantic into
Yes.
the Mediterranean?
Yes.
How fast were you going? Do you recall?
At times we would reach our top speed, which was about, I think, 32 knots, 32 to 35 knots. I don't think we ever got up to high as 35 because that would have, I would have remembered that, I think. But I think between 32 and 35.
Now, as you're moving quickly across the Atlantic into the
Mhm.
Mediterranean, what's the sense of the crew as you're moving closer to this conflict? You mentioned earlier that maybe there's a ceasefire, it's over. Was there any antipathy, any fear among the crew?
I think we all were a little bit apprehensive. I don't think we were real sure where we were going. I remember calling my folks from Panama to tell them that, yeah, I'm not going to be home for a while. We're going out, minding operational security, to say we can't really tell you where we're going, but we won't be home as scheduled. And I think it was more or less, my folks knew where we were going, and they kind of alluded to that, and I'm like, I think so. And so a lot of it had to do with operational security, not saying anything to anybody over an open phone line, things like that. But yeah, once we got going and realized where we were going, I think there was a little bit of apprehension.
Now, how was the crew functioning? It's a brand new crew on a ship that's been brought out of mothballs. How was it functioning? What was the morale among the crew as a working force?
I think it was good. Initially, it was great morale. Um, we all saw this as an opportunity to go out. We'd been in Nicaragua already as a show of force. And so we kind of all saw this again as an opportunity as a show of force.
Was this a show of force for the Sandinistas against
Yes.
the Sandinista guerrillas under
Right.
Ronald Reagan?
Right, exactly.
When you were in Nicaragua, let's talk about that for a
Okay.
minute. What did you do to provide a show of force? What does that entail?
Basically, we just went up and down the coast. Went up and down the coast of Nicaragua to kind of let folks know we were there. If anything happened, we could respond. And I think the message was clear.
You think it got across to the Sandinista?
I think it definitely got across to the Sandinistas. I don't think they had seen anything quite like that before. They may have seen other ships, destroyers like that in the area, but I don't think they ever saw anything as big as our ship.
Now, we're going to be talking, next conversation, continuance will be on Beirut situation. Before we get to Beirut, based on your experiences off of Nicaragua, based on your experiences off of Beirut, how effective do you think the Battleship New Jersey is as a show of force vessel at that time in the early 1980s?
It definitely was an effective deterrent, an effective show of force because of the advanced weapon systems and just because of the fact that we had the 16-inch guns and that could, throw, as everybody knew, kind of throw something the size of a Volkswagen 25 miles, and so I think it definitely was a reliable show of force.
Now we're going to get to off the coast of Beirut, and we're moving along because Ron is kind enough to give us an interview during a tour, a visit of the ship, a reunion of the ship. You get off the coast of Beirut. What happens there?
We got off the coast of Beirut, and we all just pretty much went about our day. I was still in deck at the time, so my job basically stayed the same. Painting, repainting, polishing what needed to be polished, cleaning what needs to be cleaned, and just the basic maintenance of the ship. There were others who had other jobs. I know that the medical staff was very busy in the event that they would be called upon to administer first aid or anything to anybody. I know they were going through a lot of how to treat battle injuries and things like that. But we all just kind of went about our day. At the time that we arrived off the coast of Beirut, I happened to be on the selected to serve down in the galley. Everybody had to take a tour there. So my time in First Division was cut short, and I was sent down to the mess decks to do about 3 months of what they called mess cooking. And we basically served the crew, prepared the food, worked the long hours, and it was everybody just kind of did what they had to do.
And how old were you at this time?
I was probably just turned 21.
Now, walk us a little further along. What happens next?
The next thing that I vividly remember is in 1983 when the Marine barracks was bombed. I remember when the embassy was, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut had its problems, but I remember vividly sitting it was on a Sunday, and I remember sitting on the mess decks. I was just finishing up breakfast when they called our division away to what they called Man the Ready Turret, which at the time was Turret 2. We went down there. We didn't know what to expect. We were down there for a good part of the morning, and I think around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, the general quarters alarm sounded, which meant everybody would now go to battle stations. And at that time, shortly thereafter, the captain came on board and informed us that the Marine barracks had been bombed, and we had been called to possibly provide gunfire into the area to help the Marines. And I think there was some frustration up to that point because we hadn't really done any gunfire exercises or anything like that since we've been off the coast of Beirut. And so there might have been a lot of frustration on the crew at that point. So we were all ready to go. We were amped up. We were ready to go. Let's do this.
Yeah, what's the reaction when the crew first gets the message from the captain that 241 Marines had been killed in this terrorist bombing?
Anger. Let's get these guys. Let's fire up the guns. Let's get these guys, and almost like a payback.
And so, how long before you're called to fire?
We actually didn't fire that day, and I think that was kind of a letdown for us because we were ready to go. We wanted to do it, but there was, I think, so much red tape that we had to go through and so many levels of approval that we had to get in order to fire. And I'm sure, I don't know it, but I'm sure that, we were ready. We had requested permission to fire, and it just never got far enough. When we did fire the guns, the first time we fired the guns, I was actually disappointed because I happened to be home on leave at that time on Christmas leave, and that was in December. And we'd fired the 5-inch guns, and I thought, darn, I missed the fun. All my friends. I thought about all my friends and stuff that were here, and so yeah, initially it was disappointing.
And how about, were you back when they fired the 16-inch guns?
Yes, got back that later on, the following year when we fired. I think it was almost 300 rounds of 16-inch ammunition, and that was incredible. The whole day was just incredible. You felt the guns going off, the reverberation throughout the ship. It was amazing. At the time, I'm trying to recall right now where I was, because I believe I was with Public Affairs at that time, and so I was not in the powder handling room where I normally would have been if I would have been in First Division. And so I was at my general quarter station in Damage Control Central, just kind of had my phone line. I was talking to my friends and stuff that were in charge of the missile launching. And that was pretty quiet, so we didn't think that was anything like that was going to happen. But just to be here when the guns were going off was amazing.
What would you tell somebody who's never been on the ship what it means to be aboard a battleship, one of the last of the battleships in the world, firing its 16-inch guns?
We talked about this earlier, I think, with some of my friends last night, and just being on the ship, you couldn't be on the main deck to watch the guns go off for obvious reasons. But no matter where you were, if you had a view outside, you could actually feel the heat from the barrels when they went off. It was an awesome display. Safety was always a big concern, but as long as you were safe, you could watch the guns from the bridge up, and it was an incredible experience.
And how did the crew react to the firing of the guns the day after, hours after?
We loved it. We really did. There was the day after we fired the close to 300 rounds, I think there was a real boost in everybody's morale and things like that. Like, that was, I think, almost like our payback from the Marines being bombed.
How about there was one of your men from board the ship, electronics mate, was killed?
Chief Gorchinsky.
Mm-hmm. Mate Gorchinsky. How did the men react to that when you heard that?
that was a little bit, I think for his division, was very hard. For the rest of us, it was hard, but a lot of us, there were those of us that did not work with Chief Gorczynski, and so we weren't real sure how to react. Later on, when we got back, on our way back from Long Beach, we had a burial at sea for him, and that was a powerful ceremony right there. That we had his family here, and I was working once again in public affairs at the time, and I remember working with my colleagues videotaping it, and that was it was a really powerful ceremony.
Interesting. How did it feel? I know the ship was at sea for a long time, and you had that, I read about and talked to people who came on the ship to replace people like yourself.
Yeah.
And how were those people received, the reservists who came aboard the ship?
I think they were well received because obviously without the influx or the support from the reserve community, we wouldn't have been able to have this lottery that sent folks home for, a brief period, 2 weeks, whatever it happened to be. So I think they were accepted. There might have been some folks, some pockets of resistance bringing the reserves in, only because they may have been around for longer and had the chest full of medals, but they were only in E2 or what have you. But personally, I think they were well received. I had an opportunity to work with
Was
them.
there a little friction then between
Yes.
the reservists because they're long experience,
Yeah.
maybe dating back to Vietnam if they were in the service
Yeah.
that long,
Yeah.
compared to people like yourself who might have been in for a year or so?
Right.
There's a little friction then.
A little bit of friction.
Old guys versus new guys type thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There was some friction there. Everybody I don't think was accepted, with open arms. These guys I think had to prove themselves. And
Did they prove themselves as reservists in all cases?
yes, I believe they did. I believe they did. They came in, they did what they were supposed to do, gave those of us who were lucky enough to go home a break. So yeah, I think they did what they were supposed to do.
Tell us about the captain of the ship. What do you recall?
We actually had two captains. Captain Fogarty was initially part of the commissioning crew, and then Captain Milligan took over in September of 80. I believe it was September of 82 or 83 when he took over a change of command ceremony. They were, I think, fair. I don't think they had exposure, as a lot of us didn't, to the diplomacy that was involved when we were in Beirut. The crew morale was important to them. So whenever they could, they would, they'd have barbecues, cookouts, things like that. We had boxing matches, stuff like that, just to kind of lighten things up a little bit. And so they both were great folks.
They're effective, would you say they're effective leaders?
Yes, I believe that they were. Both were selected for further advancement from captain to admiral after their time on the New Jersey, and so I think that speaks highly of their leadership skills and their background as well.
During this time in the early 80s, the military had trouble getting people in, good people, and sometimes some not so good people come in. On the battleship, did you have mostly, for want of better words, good people? Did you have any tough people who wanted to cause problems, drugs, so like that?
We had an eclectic mix. We had good folks. We had the folks that were, that had the option of military or jail. Drugs, I don't think were that big of a problem, because during this time also in the military was the time of not in my Navy. getting drugs out of the Navy, getting drugs out of the military overall. Um, we weren't, we didn't have urinalysis tests back then, but if somebody was suspected, yeah, then you would proceed with that. But there weren't general random urinalysis exams.
So at this point, from your experiences, is it safe to say that that real nadir, that dark period of the 70s for the military, we're starting to pull out of it by the early 80s?
I like to think so. I like to think so. I think there were, the Navy still had some damage control to do, and I think they've done a good job of that. But during that time, as I said, I think there was a pretty eclectic mix of people. There were folks who were good, and there were folks who you knew that you just really didn't want to associate with unless you wanted to get into trouble.
Were those people weeded out of the ship's crew as time went on, or did they just sort of slide by, people look the other way?
A lot of times, there were some that were discharged because we wanted to keep the crew kind of above standard. But then there were also those that I think learned their lesson and stayed aboard.
How about the issue of race relations? 1948, Harry Truman goes ahead and integrates the military. And as you look at the cruise books of the Battleship New Jersey, but World War II, I've done this all the way up to the late 1980s when they put the ship away. You see a changing crew just by looking at the pictures, which is a great experience. Talk to me about the condition of race relations aboard the ship at the time.
I think there were some race issues, but they were sporadic. It wasn't something that was rampant or anything like that. As I said earlier, you're going to have the good folks, you're going to have the bad folks, and I think any time that you get a cross-section of society in an enclosed area for an extended period of time, you're going to have issues. But there were not really any real prejudices or discrimination on board the ship either.
Did you have any officers who were minority officers at the time, do you recall? Because the first black officer aboard the ship was 1954, Lewis Ivy, and I've interviewed Mr. Ivy. Later a doctor, became a medical doctor. Did you have any minority officers, black, Hispanic, Filipino?
We did. We had black officers on board. We had Samoan officers on board. We had Filipino officers on board. So just as the crew had an eclectic mix, their officers were the same way.
Were those officers accepted by the crew?
Yes. Yes.
So there's no question if you're Filipino with a Filipino name, you're Filipino. There's no question you follow that officer's orders, you don't talk back, or just
You do.
because he is Filipino.
You do. Because that was just the military. He is an officer. He's giving you an order. You follow the order.
Talk to me about the quality of officers aboard the ship. How would you describe it?
A lot of them were new. A lot of them were new officers. I think first tour, second tour. We didn't have too many officers that were originally part of the crew. As in the enlisted ranks, we did have people who were back from the 40s, back from the 50s, back from the 60s, who wanted to come back. And there was a lot of good information exchanged between those, good teaching between those. So, and I think the teaching expanded also from the senior enlisted to the officer community as well.
Now, once you get out of the Navy in 1985, what do? What happens next?
I remember vividly my interview with Captain Milligan right before I left. He made it a point to kind of interview everybody before they left. And I remember my interview with him, and he asked me specifically, "What are you going to do when you get out?" And at that time, I thought possibly getting back into radio. I knew I didn't want to go back into TV, but getting back into radio and doing, just kind of taking my Navy experience, hoping that I would be able to take that experience with my prior experience and move on to bigger markets and things like that.
And that's what you did.
Actually, no.
No.
I when I got out, I didn't get back into radio, didn't get back into broadcasting because I was not getting any phone calls. I'd send out tapes, I'd send out resumes and things like that. Didn't get any hits on any of that. So what I did, what I did is I called my mom back here in Maryland, and I said, basically, can I come home? And of course, mothers, fathers, being what they are, said, sure, come on back. So I came back home and initially went to work in the banking industry as a teller, and worked as a teller for a little while, and then worked as a loan officer, mortgage loan officer, for a little while, and then eventually worked my way into the federal government where I am now.
And you're doing what in the federal government now?
I currently am with the Central Intelligence Agency, and I am with the Open Source Center.
Which is what? Describe
The
that for us.
Open Source Center is an organization or a center that provides open source material to members of the intelligence community for analysis and fact-finding, things like that.
And that's sort of somewhat related to your public relations interest in
Exactly.
radio, getting information out to people
Exactly.
in some way. So you've grown
Yes,
over your career.
definitely,
and
definitely.
moved in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, to wrap up the interview, because I know Ron's kind enough to be doing an interview during lunchtime, and he's probably hungry. Final question. Is there anything I should have asked during this interview that I didn't that you think is important to talk about?
I think Beirut was important, and I think we covered it well. I think it kind of is a reflection a little bit of society when Ronald Reagan was president, building up the Navy for just this purpose, for being able to go out and go places where we could show the flag, show the force, and hopefully serve as a deterrent.
Were you a deterrent? Now that you have time to look back, were you a deterrent? Effective deterrent?
I think we were. I think we were. Beirut was a little bit more difficult because we were not just the U.S. Navy there. We were the Navy as part of the multinational peacekeeping force, which was made up of the United States, Great Britain, France, and I believe it was Spain at the time. And so kind of working together for that one common goal. So I do believe we were a deterrent.